So I remember the moment that I became really passionate about culture. It was about 10 years ago, and I just left a cushy enterprise gig to go join a startup down in LA, founded by a bunch of the original MySpace team, a really smart group of folks, and I really connected with their idea and their passion. I remember being there the first few months, and I noticed that half the team was going off for a few hours and playing Xbox every day. And this continued for a number of weeks. And so I remember having lunch with the CTO one day, and I had asked him, don't you care that we have so much work to do, and half the team is off playing Xbox? We're so busy. So he looks over and he says, I really don't care what the team does while they're at the office. I know they'll stay up till 2 a.m., they'll work weekends on their schedule, they'll do whatever it takes to ship on time. So no, I'm not worried about it. And I remember going back home and reflecting on that and thinking about my past experiences. I wasn't new to startups. I had worked at a couple of startups and big enterprise shops, but they all shared a similar trait, which was productivity equals time at desk. And it was about top-down and management-focused, right? Not a lot of autonomy. So here I was in this new environment where impact and results mattered more than just looking busy. It was about autonomy and freedom. It was about openness and collaboration. And I saw my own skills grow exponentially while I was there in terms of abilities and confidence. I was tackling projects that just a year before that I didn't think I'd be able to handle because it was okay to fail. It was okay to try again. And I share that story because while that company never grew as expected, to me, that was a culture of innovation. That was a culture of freedom. And now that I'm at a new company, a fast-growing startup, the challenge becomes, how do you take that same feeling of innovation, autonomy, and low process, low overhead, and high coherence, and translate that into a company that's growing and adding people rapidly? So in this talk, I hope to walk you through some of the things that we've done to help facilitate that culture and to try and keep that feeling of innovation alive. So with that, my name is Jim Plush, Senior Director of Engineering at CrowdStrike. I was employee number 30 of over 500 now, so I've seen the rapid growth phase, and I've seen a lot of the changes that were made. I'm also a member of the culture team, so I deal with a lot of these issues day to day with a team of individuals that I'll discuss in a few slides. If you want to talk about any of this offline over a beer later, I can hit me up on Twitter. I'm pretty active there, and I'll be free the rest of the day. So let me give you a little background about CrowdStrike so you kind of get a sense of how everything works. So we're an endpoint security company, picking up where a lot of the big AV players have sort of left customers in the dust. They're still experiencing breaches, and we see that happening in the news all the time. We were the first cloud-based real-time endpoint protection company. So what that means in practice is we have a kernel-level sensor that sits on desktops, laptop servers, and we're constantly sending telemetry back and forth to our cloud systems to identify potential breaches and threats. We also do a lot of the data analysis on the endpoint against machine learning models and indicators of attack, kind of looking at the full kill chain of how hackers actually compromise systems. And given that we're cloud-based, we're also pretty high scale. You may have seen us recently at in regards to the DNC breach attribution, where we came out and identified Russia as someone that was trying to tamper with our election process. And so we were the first ones called in to do a lot of that investigation, and a lot of our cloud systems were used for that attribution. I mentioned we're high scale, so we see about 1 million events inbound per second that have to be processed in near real time. And we've got many, many petabytes of data under management. And we do all that using fun open source tech like Go, Elasticsearch, Cassandra, Kafka, that sort of technology. So let's level set on culture, because everyone kind of thinks about culture differently and has the different ideas of what that means to them. Sometimes when I talk to folks at conferences or out and about, a lot of people say, well, our company doesn't have culture. We don't really talk about that. It's not something we're active. But the reality is every company has a culture, right? Culture is how business gets done. It's how teams interact. It's how you ship code. It's how executives treat employees. Management treats each other. Your development environment is your culture, right? Are people fixing broken builds? Are they looking at broken tests, going the extra mile, right? All these factor into what kind of culture you have and how product gets shipped. It's also about what happens when no one's looking, right? What happens when management's not staring at you all the time and asking for status? Are people doing the right thing? So all those are cultural issues, right? It's not ping pong. And those same folks I talk to tend to think, well, that's not my job. That's management, that's HR. They're the people that think about culture. I was hired to write code. That's what I'm going to do. But I know the demographics of this audience, and it's a lot of principals, architects, senior engineers, technical leaders. And the reality is, you all are the culture influencers. People come in, and they're looking at you to see how business is getting done, right? How should I care about builds? How should I care about automation? How should I treat my peers? What do we value? And so I say that by sort of challenging you to, as we go through these slides, to realize that you're not a passenger in this culture experiment, right? You need to be part of that solution that you want to see. So think about those things as we go through and how you could potentially apply these to your company. A lot of the stuff we'll go through started as just a small team of 5, showed promise and something we valued and we wanted to keep reinforcing, and got adopted organizationally. So I'm going to take you back to the early years and how things got started. And we said next-gen startup cultures, right? What does that mean, next-gen? And I kind of think of companies that start today have 2 main foundations that make them next-gen. One, distributed from the start, right? It's very difficult to compete these days for geographic talent locally. So you got to be willing to open up your talent pool as you start and figure out how to make it work as a distributed company. I mean, the reality is once you've passed 1 floor of a building, you're now a distributed company, right? So you have to start thinking in that aspect. And culture from the start. So if you can't compete with these packages from the big companies, you have to give people a great work experience. You have to give them autonomy, let them fail and learn, right? And let them grow, give them leadership opportunities. Because I know the startups I've been, the most learning I've accomplished is while I was at startups. So I remember starting to interview at CrowdStrike, and I'd worked with the CEO in the past. I knew some of the founding team. I knew it was going to be really successful, but I wasn't really sure about another security company, right? Security companies tend to be closed source and secret and private, and that wasn't really the culture that I wanted to get into again. But while I was interviewing, it became clear that that's not the kind of company that they wanted to create either. They wanted to give back information to the community and be open and share and release tools, use open source, contribute to open source, and that aligned a lot more with what I was looking for. So I joined on, and honestly, the first year or so, we didn't really talk a lot about culture, other than things we value. We were just busy trying to get a product ready, iterating with customers, getting feedback, and then things started taking off. Started getting more sales, needed to hire. We started getting feedback, bug reports, new feature requests, and things started coming in from customers like, hey, we need SAML integration. Okay, well, no one joins a startup to work on SAML integration, right? So now we had to start balancing who gets to work on that project and who gets to work on the new innovative code. And you start realizing these are cultural issues, right? And needing to balance that. So early on, we put together this concept of a culture team. And the culture team is a representative from all the departments, HR, engineering, finance, cloud team, sensor team, kind of a wide breadth of representation for the employee base. And one of the things that we needed to do was phrase our mission and define our values. So phrase our mission is, why did we come to this company in the first place? Let's get that into a soundbite that we can kind of rally around and use that as a motivator. And then secondly, define the values. What is it in the engineering organization we valued, right? And we wanted to see from an employee standpoint, a leadership standpoint, management standpoint, and then more importantly, how are we going to incentivize behaviors to reinforce those values? Because if you just write it on a piece of paper on a wall somewhere, right, people are going to ignore it. It's the decisions you make that reinforce those values, right? That's how culture is built. And I'll give you an example of something that the culture team would kind of work on that's a cultural issue. Early on, we had this concept of team bonuses. And the idea was each team at the beginning of the quarter would define some of the big things they wanted to accomplish. And if you hit those targets at the end of the quarter, you got some cash. Very well intentioned, meant to drive productivity. But what we started noticing that was incentivizing behaviors that we didn't actually want to see as we scaled. An example was, let's say the cloud team is busy working at the end of the quarter on some projects they have to get done, and you have the sensor team cranking away on their projects, and they need some help from someone in the cloud to help finish one of their projects. Now the cloud team is incentivized to finish their projects first, so they get a bonus. Everyone gets some shoes for the kids that quarter. But now you're valuing the team over the company's success. And if you watched talk from Matt Rainey from Uber, he's got a great formula there, which is company greater than team greater than self. And anytime you violate that formula, you have a problem. And so we had a problem, right? We were choosing the teams over the company goal because if they had shipped that feature, we might have been able to get additional sales. So those are the kind of cultural issues we look to find out how are we incentivizing behaviors and how can we turn those things around and get it right. Company culture is the byproduct of consistent behavior. What you do always wins against what you intend to do. I think a lot of people miss this point, but this sums up culture very well. It's not just about passing around someone's culture deck and saying, oh, we should do that, or writing a bunch of values on the wall and passing that around. Every decision you make reinforces those cultural norms of how business gets done. And if people see you sending out surveys, for example, and they never see the results, they don't see any change from those, they're not discussed, people are going to stop taking your surveys, and you're not going to get feedback that you need. So you have to be very conscious that when you define those kind of values, you have to think how you're actually going to change your decision-making in a way that reinforces those, right? Because every decision incentivizes some behavior. So as a culture team, we try to look at, what can we learn from past companies we worked at? What are some of the anti-patterns that we saw that we didn't want to repeat from other companies that scaled up or, places that we worked at that we didn't like the culture there? And then let's structure the environment and structure our management style in a way that hopefully we can naturally avoid some of those. So what are some of the contributors to poor culture? Poor management practices. Right? Managers putting their favorite people on the good projects, wrong people getting promoted, fired, hired, people being limited for opportunities in the company and upward mobility, managers painting themselves in a better light because there's a single pane of glass to upper management. Like all those play into people not feeling like their voice is heard and that issues are being raised. Lack of autonomy. Right? You hire smart folks and then you micromanage them. You take their decision-making ability away, and then you expect to have happy folks. If you're going to hire smart people, you have to be willing to let them fail, let them learn, and grow. And in a leadership role, that's sometimes tough because you may know what the solution is, but you have to let them fail and learn, right? Because we learn a lot through those. Too much process, too many meetings. So people think as you scale up a company, you need to bring in the adults, you need to add a bunch of process and meetings. Now it takes 10 people to figure out if you can put a button on the UI. Like that creates that's definitely not a culture of innovation, right? Then you start to become the behemoth you're trying to replace. So I'm going to walk through two ways we accomplish that. One is what are the structural things we put in place, and then what are some of the more people-oriented things to give folks a good working environment. Let's start off with structure. So people don't leave companies, they leave managers. Right? This is not always true, but right, we've all probably had our share of this, or we felt that we weren't given opportunities or we weren't growing or learning. So one of the things we put in place early on is called skip level one-on-ones. And if you're not familiar with that, if you know the concept of one-on-ones, a VP will have managers report to them. Managers will have engineers, and the managers will have one-on-ones with the engineers, and the VP will have one-on-ones with the directors. So in that model, you're allowing managers to paint a single pane of glass, right, up the chain. You're not allowing for team issues to come to light and surface. Now the manager gets to control the message in a way that maybe makes them look better, maybe doesn't raise issues they don't see as important. So skip level one-on-ones will have the VP have one-on-ones maybe less frequently with the engineering team, so it just sort of levels the playing field and allows that visibility to rise and executives and other leaders to hear what the actual problems of the team are. And so I think it's not groundbreaking, but it's one of the more important things we put in place that just sort of levels the playing field, which I think is nice. Multiple sign-offs on promotions. This gets into managers in the past having tendency to promote the wrong people for various reasons, personal or pressure. Especially when you get into senior and principal type positions, you're expected to be impactful across the organization. Right? It's not just one team that you're impactful for. So if you can't justify promoting someone as a senior or principal engineer to your peers, then that person probably may need to work on additional skills or work on some outreach across teams. And you also have to challenge each other on why people aren't getting promoted, right? Why people are getting left behind, and look at other training or opportunities that they can take to maybe grow their career. So it sort of works both ways there. And in our model, managers don't control tasks. Managers are more facilitators and working on career development and some tactical issues day to day. And I'll get into our SDLC in a little bit, but taking managers out of the tasking removes some of those negative incentives to feel pressure and put people on special projects or executive special projects. So again, structural things that lead to not incentivizing that behavior in the first place because you can't. If you want to increase innovation, you have to lower the cost of failure. I think a big misconception people have is invention equals innovation. So when I talk to people out there, talk about innovation, it becomes, well, my company's not very innovative, my team's not very innovative, I don't think of new ideas all the time. But that's not innovation, right? Apple didn't invent the mouse, Docker didn't invent containers, but they were able to make it significantly a better experience for people to use, and they innovated on that, and they worked on refining that until it became popular and easy to use. And so innovation really is about how fast can you put something out there, gain understanding, learn, take it back, refine it, push it out, and repeat that cycle. Working with customers, understanding how to lower the friction, or even the development cycle, right? How fast can you ship code to production in a safe way? So that's really innovation. Can you make a 30% improvement in some process or product? Like, that's innovating, right? Just making things better. And if you have people doing that at a wide level, then the sum of all those innovations, that's how you become an innovative company. And that's a big focus on automation. I think automation typically comes from the bottom up, a lot of companies, right? Engineers say, we need to automate, we need to invest in CI, we need to invest in build infrastructure. But at a leadership level, you really have to know that that's how you get innovation. That's how you make it safe to fail, right? We're all going to push bad changes out. We're all going to push bugs. The question is, how fast can you fix those and revert? Investing in canary deployments, blue-green deployments, rapid rollbacks, right? That is a technical leadership opportunity to create an innovative company. Avoiding process is probably the number one, I would say, on the list as you grow, because there's a tendency, as you're adding all these new folks, that they're trying to bring in process from these big companies that you may not be ready for. So I'll give you an example. We had a 5-minute UI outage a few years ago because a developer pushed a bad config, right, to production. And an executive we had at the time, who's no longer with us, had a freak out, wasn't even on the engineering team, but decided that every production change needed to go through them, right? They needed to prove everything. So we have all these engineers, and we're like, no, we're definitely not doing that. That's a terrible idea. And there was a lot of friction and back and forth. And I wish I'd known about this concept back then, but if you've read the Google SRE book, which I highly recommend, they have this concept called error budget. An error budget is getting into that friction between operations, management, and product teams. Like product teams want to move fast, they want to iterate, they want to get their code out and have customers use it, right, and feel it. Operations, right, they want things stable. They want to sleep at night, right? And executives don't want to hear it from the customers when there's an outage. But the reality is most apps don't need 100% uptime. You're not gonna get it. So you define what your availability target is. So if you're saying I want 4 nines of availability, then I have 52 minutes of an innovation budget, an error budget, where I know I'll be down for 52 minutes a year. You should expect that. And that allows the product team to move fast and iterate and make changes. And as long as you're under that budget, then you don't get that automatic pressure from operations or other teams to, hey, slow down. Now, when you approach that error budget, and you start getting 45, 50 minutes of downtime, then it's time to take a step back. How are you testing? How are you deploying? Why can't you roll back faster? Like, what can we invest in on the automation side? Clearly, something is not right. But I think that's a really awesome concept for enabling innovation, that you don't have to fight those battles, and it's a natural blocker to just add process. As you grow the company and you make mistakes, people want to naturally add process, but that's a quick way to kill innovation. And there's always good process, right? We like automation, that's a process, but we don't like bad process. And when you do that post-mortem, back up and use the 5 whys approach. So had we just said, root cause is developer pushed a bad config to production, resolution, no more configs to production. Right? We didn't actually solve the problem. So you have to look and say, well, why did the developer push that bad config? Like, okay, they weren't able to test in our integration environment. Okay, why couldn't they test in the integration environment? There was another team testing a big change and they couldn't get their code in. Well, why couldn't they get the code in? Because we can only support one major thing in integration at a time. Right? That's the actual problem, is we needed more dynamic environments for people to be able to spin up smaller mini clouds and test things before they roll it out. So doing that approach, right, keeps innovation alive and reduces process, and you get to the actual root cause. Meetings are a symptom of a bad organization. The fewer meetings, the better. I think there's a lot of controversy on people thinking engineers hate meetings. Engineers don't hate meetings, we hate bad meetings. Right? We hate meetings at the wrong time. We hate a lot of meetings. There's always good meetings, right? So one of the things we have in our culture is to question all meetings, right? Just because an executive or someone sent you a meeting invite doesn't mean you need to take it. You kind of have to look at your schedule and see, is there an agenda? Do I have to be on this meeting? Is there someone that could send out notes? Can it be recorded and someone sends out the video? I don't know if you've read the Paul Graham article on makers versus managers, but he sums it up really well, where if you're a manager, you're working in 30-minute increments, right? You're going from meeting to meeting, you're working very tactically through the day, you're not building a lot of context. When you're in maker mode, right, you're building something, you need long blocks of time. Right? You need to think about hard problems, put context in your head. And if you're getting interrupted with meetings all the time, right? If you have a meeting at 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock, ends at 4, are you going to be productive at 4? No, you're probably just going to check email and then go home. So knowing that impact, and it's really about meeting timing that we try and reduce. I think 1/3 of all the responses I get for why are you looking to leave your current company comes down to, I'm in too many meetings, there's too much process, I don't feel productive. And I don't think enough technical leaders really listen to that and take active steps to reduce that meeting load on the engineering teams. Especially I've been in enterprise companies, and as you start moving up the technical ladder, it just feels like you're in more and more meetings and you have to be in every conversation, and it quickly becomes a job you hate. So we put this thing together called No Meeting Thursday. And this is an example of something that started out on a small team. So when the cloud team started, within the first 6 months, we put this blocker in place that, on Thursday is, our special day, right? We own our schedule. So no internal meetings, no customer meetings. If production issues and live site issues happen, obviously they take precedence. But as a normal operating procedure, no additional meeting load. Because we knew that this tendency might manifest as we grow, right? You start adding other people, other teams, you have to convert. They're in different time zones, different locations, and you can quickly become, just kind of stuck in the rut. So we put this in place, and once we built the culture team and started talking about how we, keep innovation as we grow, they all wanted to kind of adopt that concept. And so it wound up being something we talked about in the culture team and then raised to the executive team. And it was kind of a no-brainer. It's like, what kind of company can't give you 8 hours to work quietly? It seems ridiculous when you say it out loud. But I know a lot of companies where that would be frowned upon. So we put that in place organizationally, and that's an example of one team that showed how effective it was. It was surveys that we sent out as everyone's favorite and most productive day. And we were able to kind of demonstrate that on a small scale and then grow it up. So creativity is thinking up new things, but innovation is doing new things. There's companies out there that do 20% time or hack days or hackathons. But if you want to innovate, you really need kind of longer blocks of time. You need to be able to work with others. So we've brought this to the culture team and talked about what we can do to facilitate breaking down silos and letting people work together on non-scheduled projects. And we thought, we could do a hack week. But because we have representatives in the culture team from HR, finance, everyone, the question became, well, why can't we do this at the company level? Why can't the entire company be innovative and take a week to work on big, impactful projects? Right? HR can be innovative. If they reduce the cycle time for interviews by 30%, that's a positive, innovative impact in how fast we can move. So we pitched that up, and we adopted that at the organizational level. And the way it works is everyone posts an idea up on this intranet page that they want to work on for that week. It could be, hey, I want to learn Spark, right, for the week. I'm going to go get a bunch of books and go off to the beach and learn Spark. It could be, I want to reduce cost by 30% on this service. I know exactly what I need to do. Great, you were just innovative. I want to work on a new feature with these 3 other teams, and we need to fly into this office so we can be heads down. Fabulous. We have generous travel budget allocated for Think Week, where you can go and, work with teams you might not normally, and just kind of break out of the rut and do something fun. So I'm going to walk you through how we actually build software and how do we translate that feeling of autonomy and leadership into our development process. So we start with a single prioritized list in engineering of everything that we need to get done. This is customer projects, infrastructure projects, automation projects, security projects. It's all just kind of in a single pane of glass so that everyone can see what's going on in the organization. It reduces the hidden projects that people might not see, day to day. So let's say we want to build this feature foo. Customer, had a great need for this new feature. We want to build it. At the leadership level, we'll add a bunch of context around this, right? Why are we building foo? Why do we want to invest in it? What are the market opportunities? What are the competitive pressures? Right? Building this huge contextual layer on this project so that whoever gets it can work autonomously and understand how that fits into the bigger picture. How does this fit into the long-term roadmap or where we want to go as an organization? Once we get that step done, we'll spin up what we call a discovery team. So if we say foo needs a cloud person and a sensor person, we'll go ahead and spin those folks up, and we'll go ahead and give them this feature to work on, but not to code it, but to do more of a feasibility, right? Spend up to 2 weeks and dig deeper. We think we're going to invest a lot in this feature. Let's make sure it's about the size we thought. Let's make sure we have the test infrastructure we need or the cloud infrastructure we need. Do we need 10 times more people than we actually thought? So I think this is an important step that a lot of companies miss as they invest in these big projects without taking that initial step. They spin up all these people, and then you get into the project, and you're like, wow, this is totally different than we expected, and we need all this new stuff. So spending that time allows us to invest in the projects that that we really think will be impactful. So they'll go ahead and put back this feature into the list with the feasibility, how many people they think should work on it, a rough architecture and kind of event flow of how it fits in the system. And let's say they say we need a UI person and a product manager. So we'll go ahead, if we have capacity, and we'll spin up those folks. And we'll go ahead and give them foo, and we'll put a box around them, and we'll call those a virtual team. And this is a cross-section, cross-functional team that could be in different offices, distributed, local. But once they're in that box, they're basically an autonomous team. And the team will elect a leader, or someone will ask to be the lead of that team. And they'll be responsible for delivering that end-to-end. They now have everything they need to go deliver this project. And we don't care what methodology they use. You want to use Scrum? Great, figure it out. You want to use Kanban? Fabulous. You want to use a Google Doc? Great, we've had successful projects just using Google Docs. So by not prescribing that, it gives people a chance to experience and learn and play with new techniques, and allows for leadership opportunities. Allows people to try out, hey, do I like leading a team? Do I like being more on the people side or interacting with others providing status? And in this model, we also don't have any dates. And by not having dates, what we give is a quarterly estimate and a confidence level. So we say, well, we think this should land in Q3, and we're 80% confident. Because I'm an engineer, and I know other engineers are really bad at estimating projects. And it's not that you're bad at estimating projects, it's all the things around projects, right? It's like, I can get this code done in 2 days. Okay, what about testing, integration testing, black box testing, metrics, alerting, right? Run books, operations, scale, fault tolerance, right? That easily adds up sometimes, especially at our scale, to be more than the project time itself. So by not having dates, we sort of factor that naturally. We let the teams decide when the project is over, when they're happy enough with the quality to a reasonable extent, but that's up to the team lead to figure that out, of when this thing is done, right? Oh, we didn't add a learning yet. We should probably spend another week on that or a few days. Like, great, get it done. Our customers want quality. So I think that's an interesting approach that's worked well for us, and giving people that leadership opportunity enables kind of a leader-leader model where you're not dictating how people work. You're just setting the guardrails, giving them some context, and away they go. So we'll have a number of these spun up at the same time, and we'll keep some capacity on the side for production issues, any kind of interrupts that come in, so that the virtual teams are left sort of untouched. And when I think back to some of my enterprise days of how I would scale this up to an enterprise org, I think I would start to look at maybe building a triangle sort of model of this interaction, where you can do it at a departmental level or a division level, and scale that model down. But it's something we're experimenting with. But it's been really successful for us. So what have we done on the people side? So the urge to excel and the urge to lead aren't the same. Sometimes I think they may be opposites. So pretty accurate quote for engineering teams. There's a lot of companies where if you want to advance as an engineer, you have to become a people manager, right? If you want to make more money for your family, you want more recognition in the company, you're going to have to get into management. But not every engineer wants to be a manager. Some engineers, many engineers, want to be just great engineers. They want to be impactful in the organization and continue to learn and grow. So we put together a dual management engineering path where you can advance in the company as an engineer at the same level and path as someone in the management track. And the key thing is this: the same compensation bands all the way up, right? All the way up to senior VP, you'll have the same benefits package, the same compensation, same options pool, like all the benefits you would get and the impact that you would get if you were a senior VP. So I think that's, gives people an opportunity to continue to do what they love if they choose not to get into people management. The only thing worse than training employees and losing them is to train them and not keep them. To not train them and keep them. With technology changing so much, there's so much new open source projects and different ideas out there. You have to have people that are going to grow and learn Not that you're going to adopt everything that's on Hacker News, but you want to know about things, right? You want to know when to apply a tool. You want to get deeper understanding of a tool. So we put in place basically an unlimited book budget, where if you want to, again, go learn about Spark, go ahead, go buy 3 books, expensive, sit down for a few days and dig into it, right, on work time, right? Because that's expected that you're growing and learning. I think a lot of people think they have to learn off hours, right? But we expect you to learn on hours because we want you to be, want you to see some solutions to new problems as they come up. Every quarter we budget for training and conferences. So we'll talk to folks and set aside a bunch of budget early in the quarter for what training you want to go to, what conferences look interesting, so that when the time comes up, it's not an argument. It's not a trade or a deal. It's like, okay, we have the money. Set aside. Go ahead, have fun. See you in a week. An opportunity across projects. Right? People want to learn new things, experience new things. So you're on a virtual team working with Go and Cassandra. It might be Python, Elasticsearch. The next project, or get to pick a project that you are more interested in. So I think it gives people an opportunity to kind of experience the full stack and stay relevant. We are a distributed team, not remote workers. I remember being in an enterprise shop, and we had this one satellite office, and they just worked on one very specific component, and they integrated with the platform. And it was very adversarial. It was very, they write terrible code, we're awesome, and they thought we write great code, and they're terrible. And it wasn't a healthy culture because we didn't have any representatives from that team, right, in our office. So we didn't have that team empathy where we could understand the struggles that they had and what they were going through, or just talk through it. And that was a challenge that we had as we started scaling up, which is, okay, we got these distributed teams, and we have folks co-locating around areas. We want to build offices, right, to start letting people come in. How do we want to structure these offices? So typically you can have very focused component teams where you say, okay, UI is in the LA office, back-end team is in this office, right? Sensor team's in that office. And while that makes component teams have very high fidelity interactions, it really tends to hurt you at a organizational level because now you don't have that interaction with other teams. So we actually consciously decided that we were going to hire across all the teams in the offices so that you have UI, back-end, right, sensor team, services, intelligence, all kind of co-located so that you can understand other people's issues, you can talk about it, and really get that sense of inclusion, which I've seen missing at past companies. Open communication is big. Like I mentioned, as soon as you're past one floor, you're basically a distributed team. So making decisions open, documented, but adding context, right? A lot of people, especially in technology, someone will make a decision and not everyone will understand it. Why are we doing that? That doesn't make sense. It's the wrong technology. But there's always context around it. There's always, we're choosing this because of these things. And as long as you can explain them and sort of work through that rationale, I think a lot of people feel a lot better about that approach than just saying, this is what we're doing. Don't worry about it. So providing context around decisions. If you're having meetings, recording those and making those available, right? There shouldn't be anything you're saying in meetings that your team shouldn't hear, aside from private HR type issues. But everything should be default to open. Because I think Rand said, if people aren't hearing things, right, they're going to assume the worst. And so you want to make sure the information gets out there. Onboarding, I'll just admit we were pretty bad at onboarding the first couple of years. I think any startup, you join a startup and you get a laptop and you're told go, and go be productive. So we've worked on that and gotten better. Put this program together called Business Accelerate, where every 2 months we'll fly in the teams, all the new hires, fly in the executives, if possible, and just spend a week walking people through all the teams, the roadmap, what products we're building, what's the goal of the company, financial information, getting them up to speed, and a lot of social time after, like going to have drinks with the team or local interaction, which I think is important. So we're working on that, but that's it's been really beneficial, and we wish we would have started that earlier. So all that's great, but how do you know how you're doing? How do you actually grade this stuff? Right? It's very hard to grade a culture. Surveys is probably your best weapon, but people do surveys sort of ad hoc a lot of times, right? There's articles of the 7 best ways you can structure survey questions to know how you're doing. But they're very general, and you need a PhD to sort of figure out what that actually means. I tend to like more direct questions for how business is getting done, right? How much process do we have? Do you feel productive? Do you feel like you're in too many meetings? Do you feel like you've been given leadership opportunities? Do you feel like you've been given training opportunities? Very specific questions that you can sort of monitor over time to see how things are trending. And if you can break that down by the long-timers view, which is people that have been there 2, 3, 4, 5 years, like that's how your culture actually is. So everyone's really excited in the first year, right? You're excited, you don't know all the dirt about the company yet, but you get into year 2, 3, 4, and you start to understand a little more, and that's how your culture really is. That's how business really gets done, right? So if you can break those stats out with that and exit surveys as people leave, trying to find out that information. Retention comparisons. There's companies out there that give you statistical packages with companies in your industry or your size, so you can get a sense of how well am I doing in retention compared to them? Are we better? Are we worse? Right? There's always some churn at companies. So you want to find out are you trending well? And then referral rates. Right? If people are coming in and they're not referring new hires, they're not excited about the company, like this is a big red flag that you got to be aware of and constantly looking at is how excited are people to share this experience with others. So what are some of the key takeaways? I would say start small. Right? A lot of this stuff, I know you're at 10,000 person companies, 50-person companies. Don't be afraid to try some of this on a 5-person team. Right? Go ahead and define your values. Like what does your team want to invest in culturally? Like, do you want to be better with automation? You want to take more pride around broken builds, right? Think about what's getting in the way of getting those values, right? Do the 5 whys on why no one's caring about broken builds or why we have no advancement or access to training materials. Like start to talk about that with the team, because that's how a lot of this stuff started with us. Just a 5-10-person team, and we sort of spread that around, and people got excited about ideas, and then it grew, right? It's a good kind of lean way of, agile way of testing things. But the main point to take away is culture is not a passive sport. Culture is conflict. Right? You have to be willing to challenge your peers. You have to be willing to challenge your management structure. And as engineers who, myself even, tend to be more introverted, right? That gets me out of my comfort zone. But that's the only way to make sure that you're growing, right? And that you're actually becoming the company that you want to. Right? If someone's not addressing that broken build, don't be afraid to say, hey, why aren't you looking at that? Like, we've got to get that fixed. There's other people that depend on that. So just holding each other accountable, I think, is the biggest challenge that I see from a cultural aspect. So I'll just leave you with, the next time your boss complains about you playing Xbox, you just tell them you're busy building culture. So, thank you, and we're always hiring.